Hello and welcome back to the Magic Ponds, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wilhelm, and today we're going to take a look at the upcoming new set of Magic Origins. Magic Origins is the last core set to be published by Wizards of the Coast, and core sets, as we know, are designed to be a little bit more basic, a little bit more straightforward, a more introductory path into the game. However, this being the last core set, Wizards has spiced it up a little bit. However, this particular video focuses on the tricks and instants that will be affecting combat in a limited environment. The purpose of this video is to make us a bit more prepared for the combat tricks and the things that we have to keep in mind when we are sitting at the pre-release tournament. Your opponent is sitting there, he's got some mana open, he's got cards in hand, and you're thinking, should I attack? Should I block? Well, let's take a look at the cards that you need to keep in mind when you're making that decision. First off, white as usual. And we start off with a real quality card. Celestial Flare, 2 white. Target player sacrifices an attacking or blocking creature. Now, sacrificing is good in the way that it gets past protection, it gets past indestructibility, but it has the drawback that your opponent chooses which creature to sacrifice. Keep in mind, however, that you can cast Celestial Flare at any point in time during the combat phase where there are attacking and blocking creatures. And creatures stay attacking and blocking even after combat damage has been dealt, even after some creatures have gone to the graveyard. So imagine that your opponent is attacking, you're blocking his smaller creatures, you're trading with his smaller creature, maybe blocking one of his big creatures, the one that you want to get rid of with a wall or something. And after damage has been dealt, after his smaller creatures have been put in the graveyard, you can cast Celestial Flare and he'll have less creatures to choose from, maybe only one. So keep in mind that for Celestial Flare, you can actually cast it after damage has been dealt, and there are still attacking and blocking creatures left on the board. So right to start off with, a little bit of a tip on how to perhaps get a little bit more out of your Celestial Flare. At any rate, a great card I'll be looking forward to playing. I'm not looking forward to it being played against me. 2 white makes it hard to splash, but if you're in white, you want this card. Next up, Enshrouding Mist. It costs half as much as Celestial Flare, and it's less than half as good. Target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to it this turn. Okay, so the good news here is your creature is gonna stay alive, most likely, after combat is done. Then it has another clause. If it's renowned, untap it. Okay, so renowned is a mechanic that's introduced in this new core set, which is not usually done. And renowned basically means that if this creature does combat damage to a player, it gets a +1/+1 counter and becomes renowned. It's a sort of one-time effect, just like Monstrosity was in Theros. Anyway, there are some cards, and especially some tricks, that care if something is renowned or not. And if the creature that you cast this on is renowned, you get to untap it. It's a cheap trick. It's only 1 more power, but it does allow your creature to trade up. And the extra toughness is not that much. But it doesn't really matter what the toughness is in most cases, because at any rate, it says prevent all damage that would be dealt to this creature this turn. The only thing the +1 thing then does, it might matter in case of different effects giving -X, since that's not damage, and it might be able to save your creature if some effect gives -2/-2, for example, and you have a 2 toughness creature. In any other case, it doesn't really matter, as all damage is prevented anyway. It fulfills the minimum requirement I have for a trick, and which is, I want a trick to help me trade up to kill something that is bigger than that creature that's blocking or attacking, that's fighting. The other requisite I have for a trick is I want my creature to stay alive. This trick does that, but in other respects it's unimpressive. Something that is good with it though, it costs the minimum 1 white. So you get kind of what you pay for. But we've been spoiled in the past with really good tricks for 1 white sometimes. Brave the Elements, for example. So you're a little bit disappointed with this, but it fulfills the minimum requirement of a trick. Kill something bigger, keeps your guy alive. Mighty Leap costs 1 and a white. You could say it's twice as effective as Enshrouding Mist. It's not quite as effective as keeping your guy alive, because although it does give more toughness, it doesn't say that damage is prevented. However, this might work a lot better as a kind of finisher move in a deck with large creatures, because your creature gains flying until the end of turn. +2/+2 and flying sounds pretty great, and sure, Mighty Leap is a welcome sight in any white deck, but it's not so impressive that you want to play too many of these. But a decent trick and something to be aware of, especially if you're running low on life, your opponent's playing white, he's got some big ground guys, and you don't have any blockers with flying, then Mighty Leap is something you need to be concerned about. Swift Reckoning, 1 and a white, and it says destroy tapped creature. But Wilhelm, wait, you might say, this is a sorcery. Are you really going to be so stupid that you're going to make the same mistake 2 videos in a row? Because in the Modern Masters Primer I called Profane Command an instant, or I listed it along with the instants, and obviously that's a sorcery. This is a sorcery too, but Magic Origins gives us another new mechanic called Spell Mastery, which says if there are 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, you may cast Swift Reckoning as though it had flash. I suppose Spell Mastery is more of a keyword, not a mechanic. At any rate, that's why I have it in the tricks, because if your opponent has 2 instant or sorcery cards in their graveyard, then the effect destroy target tapped creature, assassinate basically, can be cast at instant speed, making this a viable combat trick and a very good, very solid removal for white. So white here had 2 solid removal spells, 2 decent tricks. Let's move on to blue. With regards to blue, I want to separate the combat tricks from the counterspells. I am going to mention the counterspells, but in a different section. In this section, I'll focus on the tricks that directly affect combat. Disperse, the old classic, 1 and a blue for returning any non-land permanent. It costs more than some of the spells we've been used to seeing for just 1 blue, because those can only bounce creatures. True, most of the time you will be bouncing creatures to get the great tempo effect that blue is so known for. But don't forget that this can target enchantments, planeswalkers, and artifacts as well. And this set does have a lot of artifacts and a lot of enchantments. It sort of tends to have an enchantment matters theme. Most of the time though, you'll be wanting to bounce their guy in response to some effect, getting tempo and potentially card advantage if you can knock off a few auras at the same time. So, that about Disperse. Classical bounce spell. Next up, we have Hydrolash. Hydrolash follows a long tradition of blue spells that reduce the power of your opponent's creatures. This one costs 2 in the blue, and it gives -2/-0 to all attacking creatures. So it has a nice reach, but I've never been much of a fan of a spell that simply reduces power without killing the creatures. Sure, if you can mount a nice defense where it looks like you'll be trading, giving the opponent -2 can be devastating. However, what does make this card more playable in my eyes is the second phrase, draw a card. This card replaces itself so that at least you're not a card down when you use an effect like this. That fact makes this something I might consider using a lot more than anything else. Let's move on. Send to Sleep is another classical blue trick where you get to tap 2 of your opponent's creatures. Actually, you can tap any 2 creatures for whatever reason. However, we have Spell Mastery here again. And if you have 2 instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, then this becomes a little bit better. You can really put them to sleep, as we're used to thinking, meaning they don't untap the next phase. Cards like this, I want to remind you, tend to fit a lot better in aggressive decks than to think to use these things defensively. This card, especially if you can get Spellmaster to work, and as a blue player you should be, is a tad better than Ojutai's Breath in my opinion. But even so, I would still mainly want to have this as an offensive spell, tapping down their blockers and swinging in for the win. If I'm forced to use this defensively, sure, it works like that, but then I'm not in a situation where I want to be with this card. Let's move on to the next. Turn to Frog is another reprint. Rather fresh and also rather uncreatively named. Until end of turn, target creature loses all abilities and becomes a blue frog with base power and toughness 1/1. First, let me mention base power and toughness and remind you, any counters on the creature, any auras in the creature that affect or increase the power and toughness will continue to affect the power and toughness. This is what they want to emphasize with base power and toughness. You still count all the counters, you still count on the auras, and you still count the pump effects that are going on. So don't forget that. However, the clause loses all abilities can be very, very interesting. That basically means that you take a look at the text box of the card, you throw this on, you forget everything that says there. Things like flying goes away. So their big flyer all of a sudden can be blocked by a simple ground pounder. That can be really relevant to keep in mind. Finally, we have a creature with flash. And flash creatures, I always consider them tricks because you can cast them in the middle of combat. This one is not only just an additional blocker, it doesn't really do much as a blocker, as it just blocks, it doesn't kill their creature since it's an 0/4 wall. It's very expensive for an 0/4 wall, 3 and a blue, when we usually pay 1 blue for an 0/4 wall. And flash doesn't really give it any reason to cost that much more. However, it does have an additional effect of shrinking the power of an attacking creature. Again, like I said before, I'm not the greatest fan of simply neutering the power of an attacking creature. Once again, you can turn a trade into a win for you and get a little bit of an advantage, but at 4 mana, I'm expecting a little bit more effect than this. But still, you should be aware of this for 4 mana. One of the things with blue is they always have reasons to keep mana open. This is another one. Let's move on to black, traditionally the color of solid removal. And we start right away with just that. It's a bit expensive at 5 mana, but this is what we're coming to expect in the current limited environment. Destroy target non-zombie creature. That's going to hit a lot of the creatures in this set, although there are a few zombies in it. The creature can be regenerated. That's mostly not too relevant this day and age, but the next phrase can be interesting if you're playing a blue-black zombie deck. The zombies are, just like in Innistrad, blue and black in this core set. You can return up to 1 target zombie card from your graveyard to your hand. If you do happen to have zombies, this is a really nice source of card advantage. Destroy their best creature, get a creature back. Sounds like a great deal for 5 mana. Dark Dabbling is a nice flavorful card relating to the origin story of Liliana. If you haven't read that already, go ahead and go to the Wizard homepage and have a look at it. It actually is a very interesting, nice and flavorful little story. It has a very mediocre effect in regenerate target creature. Sure, it'll save your guy. Again, what saves this card in my opinion is the draw a card clause. You're not a card down if you use this to neuter an offensive spell by your opponent. Otherwise, this effect would just be too weak to really think about trading a card for a card. But regenerate target creature and draw a card makes it so that you can make them lose a trick and replace this card with another card, making this playable. Spell Mastery here boosts the effect to regenerate all your creatures. This can be really nice in a situation that otherwise would be a blowout. Say that they somehow manage to target several of your creatures, or that several creatures would be dying in combat. This saves your team, and then you get to replace it with another card. So Dark Dabbling, something that I'm interested in playing now because it replaces itself, and it can at times be very effective with the Spell Mastery. Next we have a Touch of Moonglove, a card that at least at first glance I'm a lot less impressed by. I said before that my minimum requirements of a trick is that it kills a creature bigger than mine and it helps my creatures stay alive. This gives me +1/+0, so okay, it deals a little bit more damage, it trades up a little bit. What really helps this trade up is Death Touch. At the same time, Death Touch render the additional power more or less useless unless they double block or even triple block. If they triple block, then you're in luck because you can just assign 1 damage to each of the blockers and kill the whole squad. With no additional toughness, however, this never helps your guys stay alive, which can be really unfortunate, making this perhaps better to use on the defense. You can use it on a wall even, in a situation where the opponent is trying to maybe bluff attack or sends in some guys just thinking he'll just bounce off one of your defenders. This will let you kill one of these attackers. You have a clause later on that says if you manage to kill a creature, the controller loses 2 life. If we compare this with a similar card from the previous set, Code of Venom, that card gave you +1 and +2 toughness and Death Touch for the same cost of 1. I feel like that's a lot better card because it helps your creatures stay alive, getting 2 life off of your opponent can be nice and might be more effective than it feels like right now, but I'd rather have my creature stay alive. Still, this does help you kill a creature dead, but sometimes you'll end up 2-for-1ing yourself if you kill their creature, but your own creature still dies in the process, and this does nothing to help it. Unholy Hunger is just simply unconditional removal at 5 mana. Unconditional removal is something you're going to need in every limited game, or you're going to want to have, let's put it like that. And this lets you have that. The Spell Mastery clause here is a minimal gain, but hey, 2 life is great whenever you can get it. But this card stands very well on its own. You can basically read it as kill target bomb for 5 mana. Sometimes gain 2 life. Sure, why not? Next up is red. Traditionally the color of tricks, and this time there's no exception. Starting off with Chandra's Fury at 4 and a red, we have a card that deals 4 damage to a player and then 1 damage to each creature that player controls. In some situation this can be an absolute blowout. There are a lot of small flying Thopters in this set that are created by a number of different cards. And these Thopters can quickly get out of control and can be really annoying, although they're just 1/1, because they fly and they tend to come in numbers. This card sweeps them off the board in one fell blow. However, this feels like more of a sideboard card, because the 4 damage to a player for 5 mana is not that impressive. Sarkhan's range is fine, because that hits players and creatures. This hits only for 4 damage, and while it is an instant, that's 1 less than Lava Axe, and Lava Axe is not a good card. However, sometimes the 1 damage to all the creatures they control can be a real blowout. So this is a situational card, and you want to be thinking whether you want this 5 mana removal spell in your pile or not. Fiery Conclusion is a similar card to Collateral Damage. It costs 1 and a red, where Collateral Damage only costs a red, but like Collateral Damage, you have to sacrifice a creature to cast this. It deals 5 damage to target creature, and only creature. If I remember correctly, Collateral Damage could also damage players. Not being able to deal damage to players is a significant drawback here. Also, I'm always wary of cards that make you have to sacrifice a creature to play it. This card can be very well used in a deck where you somehow generate tokens and generate extra creatures so that you have a lot of creatures. You can feel sure that you have creatures to use up to cast this. But you don't want to be in a situation where you have 1 or 2 solid creatures and you need to have a removal spell, because suddenly you're 2-for-1ing yourself just to get rid of 1 of their creatures. Let's move on. Fiery Impulse then. This is straightforward. This is good. It's not fantastic because for 1 red you get to deal 2 damage, again only to creatures. It has the Spell Mastery clause, which adds 1 more damage, making this into a half-hearted lightning bolt for creatures only. I don't need to tell you, that's not lightning bolt. But it's nice. I'll use it. I'll play it a lot. Ravaging Blaze, however, is going to end some games. It's going to be the big spell that you just laugh and slam down and hope they don't have a counterspell. It's almost like a Volcanic Geyser in that it's an instant for 2 red and X, and it deals X damage to target creature. And at first glance, you might say, wait a minute, Volcanic Geyser is actually better than this, because Geyser actually allows you to target players as well. Well, have a look at the Spell Mastery clause. If you have 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, this doesn't allow you to target a player, but it does damage, the same amount of damage, X damage, to the controller as well, meaning that it doubles up the amount of damage that a Volcanic Geyser can do. So, you still cannot target players, keep that in mind. It always just damages to the controller. And should something happen to the creature that you are targeting, if the opponent sacrifices it or destroys it somehow in response, this spell will fizzle and you will not deal damage to the player if you're not able to deal damage to the creature. So, still, this card is very good, and like I said, this is going to end games, especially in a nice red-green ramp deck. The Ravaging Blaze finish is going to be something we're going to see a lot of in the coming months. Smash to Smithereens includes one of my favorite words, smithereens, and in the words of Ice from Jagged Alliance, I don't know what smithereens are, but I'm about to be blown to them. Destroy target artifact is the effect, which we're used to seeing in almost every set. This costs 1 and a red to get that effect, but what makes Smash to Smithereens just a little bit better than a lot of artifact removal spells usually, especially in red, is that you get to deal 3 damage to the artifact's controller. This set has a lot of artifacts, even so Smash to Smithereens, its place is in the sideboard until you see artifacts on the other side. But once you do see him, Smash to Smithereens is a welcome removal spell that deals some damage at the same time. A nice card to have in your sideboard. Finally, we have Titan Strength for a red. This is good, efficient, affordable combat trickery at its best. +3 power, which is what red wants to see. Punch through some more power just to get more damage through if you wish. And also a token +1 toughness to basically survive combat. Red creatures generally don't really care about that. Still, I appreciate this as it fulfills the requirement. Trade up, do more damage, possibly stay alive. But what makes this card really shine is Scry. The mechanic that is so important and limited to make sure you either hit that land that you need or that you can put that land that you don't need on the bottom of the library if you need to. So for 1 red, +3/+1, Scry 1, Titan Strength is a solid trick and I'll happily play these. Moving on to green, the color of Pump. Let's see what they have for us. They start off with an aerial volley, dealing 3 damage, divided as you choose among 1, 2 or 3 target creatures. Being able to divide damage over several creatures is an extremely powerful effect. Now, when I saw this, I just thought, wow, all this for just 1 green? And then I saw, oh, creatures with flying. Well, that makes sense. This is an efficient removal spell against flyers. And most likely, even though flyers are pretty common, that means that you'll want to put this in the sideboard. Being able to split 3 damage over up to 3 creatures is going to allow you to really take down a whole bunch of these annoying flying thopters that you are going to be seeing around in the pre-release and in the limited games you play later on in the limited season. Also, dealing 3 damage to 1 target means that you can take down a fair amount of the different flyers that we have in the set. So, all in all, as green's anti-flying tech tends to be, a good removal card against flyers, but since it is so specific, the place of aerial volley is in your sideboard, but you'll be happy to have one there. Might of the Masses is an interesting pump spell in that it gives you +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature you control. Obviously, Might of the Masses, as the name suggests, wants you to swarm the board with creatures. Not necessarily small, but elves, and actually pairing elves up with goblins in a red-green thing, although absolutely horrible from a lore point of view, is absolutely great for Might of the Masses. If you have 3 creatures or more, you already have giant growth on your hand, and that's already great. Allowing you to trade up and keep your creature alive is what this pump does. It's straightforward, it's simple, but sometime with enough creatures and some trample, this card's going to win you a few games. Titanic Growth, much more straightforward. It doesn't care about anything else than you just have a little mana and gives you +4/+4. This is enough power to work as a finisher. Green has a lot of trample guys, so being able to push through 4 additional damage is going to help you end some games. A solid card, you might not want to have too many of these, but Titanic Growth is one of the classic ways to finish core set games, and it continues to be so. Finally, I have Vine Snare, the fog effect of the set. For 2 and a green, which is a lot for a fog effect, you get to prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures with power 4 or less. So this basically neuters a bunch of small guys for a turn. Overall, I don't like fog effects. They tend to be bad. When they cost a lot, I'd at least want to have some real benefit of it. This can be situationally great if you have big creatures and you're playing against someone who has a lot of small guys that he fills up the board with. This will allow you to sweep off his guys if he's trying to trade a number of small creatures or tokens with your big guys. But your big guys should be able to trample through or trap through with some real combat tricks. Vine Snare? That's the pits. Play it if you want. I think I'd be unhappy with a deck where I'm playing Vine Snare. I don't know. Tell me in the comments if you have good experiences of a card like this, because I don't like it. Let's move on to some multicolor cards. We have 2 cards that count as tricks. They're both creatures, and both of them have flash. Bounding Crassus is the sort of Simic card. 1 colorless mana, 1 green, and 1 blue. It has flash, which is why it's earned its place here in the tricks. When it enters the battlefield, you may tap or untap target creature. Hello there. for modern players, this seems like another possibility of playing a Splinter Twin deck splashing green. Although, for the love of me, I can't actually figure out why you'd want to, but it's possible. Anyway, from a limited perspective, I really like this card. Sure, it's a gold card, meaning you don't really want to commit to this very early on, but if you happen to be in these colors and you manage to get this going, flashing in a 3/3 that taps or untaps creature can really make a mess out of combat calculations. You might untap another creature that you previously attacked with to bring up another blocker. A 3/3 creature fights quite well already. You might tap one of your opponent's creatures in the beginning of combat, making his attacks a lot worse, actually perhaps making him have trouble blocking you at the incoming turn. I like this simple, elegant card. The one thing that I perhaps might wish it did have was some kind of evasion, but asking for flash, evasion and tapping or untapping for 3 mana when it's already a 3/3 is a bit much. But Bounding Crisis is an effective package, but do keep in mind that the fact that it's a gold card means that you want to be careful about in what kinds of decks you play this. The next thing is a little bit more expensive, 2 and a white and a blue. Also flashes to 2/3, but this one flies. This guy can, in the right deck, be enormously dangerous. It's a Lord of Flyers. Basically that means all your other flying creatures get +1/+1. I've mentioned a couple of times now these small Thopter things that are flying around, these 1/1s, that they tend to come in numbers. Now, imagine that suddenly these numerous little 1/1 Thopter flying artifacts are numerous little 2/2 flying artifacts. If you've played with flyers en masse before, you know that one more power in the air matters a lot. This guy can be devastating, and I'm looking forward to building some UE Flyers decks and just smashing in. So, now we've come to the part of the video where we have a look at the counterspells. And the first thing that struck me when I looked at the counterspells in this set is the sheer amount of them. There are a lot of them. We start off with Bone to Ash. At 4 mana, it's 1 mana cheaper than Contradict, which countered any spell in the previous set. However, this only counters creature spells. Countering creature spells for 4 mana is about twice as much as I'd like to pay for a creature countering spell. It has the magical phrase of draw a card in it, but still, keeping up 4 mana and then possibly not being able to do anything, because what if they play non-creature spells, or what if they just pass the turn? If they're ahead on board and you're holding up mana and they don't cast anything, they just put pressure on you, you just time-walked yourself. Sure, you might want to have a Bone to Ash anyway, because sometimes you do need counterspells. But as counterspells go, this one isn't great. Calculated Dismissal is not much better when it comes down to it. For 2 and a blue, it's basically an overcosted mana leak. Counter target spell unless its controller plays 3 is what we're used to doing for 1 and a blue. The Spell Mastery clause does add a significant effect. You get to scry too. This means that at the very least this card does have some late game application, unlike Mana Leak. Later in the game, Mana Leak loses basically all of its effect in that most people have a bunch of mana lying around anyway and they can pay the 3. This means that you can increase the cost of some spell of your opponents, possibly even countering something that costs a lot. But it does give it some late game application in that even if they do manage to cast a spell, you might get to scry too, and that can be really important later on. So in a way they've sort of fixed the problem with Mana Leak, but in fixing it they added 1 colorless mana to the cost of the spell, making Calculated Dismissal just a little bit too expensive to be good at what Mana Leak is good at. Mana Leak is good at countering early threats. This is a bit too expensive for that. Leaving up 3 mana early on is something you don't want to do. So again, just like Bone to Ash, it's not a great counterspell, but yeah, you might play one. Clash of Wills costs X in the blue, and you get to counter any spell. Well, that's what I want to see. Unless its controller pays X. Okay, so this is the classic you hope they tap out spell, but it's also one that I've found difficult to actually be able to use effectively. This one doesn't let you scry. This one doesn't exile the spell or anything. It's worse than Syncopate, but out of the 3 spells we've had so far, I think this is the counter spell I'd like to play the most, because it does have the possibility of sort of scaling with the game. Early on, you don't leave up so much mana, but your opponent doesn't have so much mana, so you're likely to be able to cancel the spell that they cast. Later on in the game, you'll be able to invest more mana into this to counter the fact that your opponent has more mana available to sort of pay for extra costs when casting his spells. So Clash of Wills does have that going for it. And every now and then, when they tap out, you get to cancel whatever they cast for the low cost of a colorless and 1 blue. So, like I said, so far Clash of Wills is my counterspell of choice in this format. Negate is a good old friend that I often leave in the deck because it simply counters any trick your opponent might play. And especially in sealed, your opponent is going to have tricks. Your opponent is going to have non-creature spells that are potentially devastating. One of the best things about Negate is that they do that fantastic anticlimactic thing of where your opponent slams down that mythic rare planeswalker they opened, expecting to take home the game, and you simply say, Negate. The problem in this set, however, is that the planeswalkers have found a way around Negate. Sneakily enough, every single planeswalker in this set starts off as a creature and then flips when certain conditions are met. So what they basically have done is they've shown a big ol' middle finger to Negate all these 5 planeswalkers together. Just imagine them standing there, Negate sobbing in a corner, and all 5 of these planeswalkers basically bullying it. Well, planeswalkers, I hope you feel happy now. Negate is crying. Alright, sorry about that small digression, but let's get back to Psychic Rebuttal. Psychic Rebuttal is a bad counterspell. Counter target instant or sorcery spell. Okay, that would be fine. This spell is just 1 blue for counter an instant, and that's a decent spell. This one counters instant or sorcery spell, but that targets you? There are not that many spells in this set that target you. And most of them are stuff you don't want to spend a card on. Let's have a look at the Spell Mastery clause and see if there's anything there that can save these cards. Alright, so you have 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard. You get to copy the spell and choose new targets. This is one of these things that you remember, kind of like Redirect. You remember those times when you cast Redirect to win the game, and it was fantastic. You don't remember all those times Redirect sat in your hand did absolutely nothing. And this Redirect doesn't even let you target most of the spells in this set, only spells that target you. This is so incredibly marginal that this is the worst of the kind of bad counterspells in this set. Psychic Rebuttal, bad counterspell, go away. Finally, let's have a look at the rares. There are a few rares here that I want to mention that work as tricks. Most of these are actually white. 3 of them are white, 1's blue. The first one we're having a look at is Gideon's Phalanx. 5 and 2 white is a lot of mana, so let's hope that the effect is equally good. It says put 4 2/2 White Knight creature tokens with Vigilance onto the battlefield. Alright, that's 8 power over 4 bodies. It's usually kind of good, but this is 7 mana. This is late in the game. A lot of times 4 small creatures are not going to do a lot of good in a board that might be gummed up with a lot of ground pounders and big guys already. Without some kind of help, these 4 2/2 White Knight creatures are going to stand around and be stupid blockers and not really going to help you win the game. Let's see if the Spell Mastery clause does any good. It gives you indestructible for all your creatures until end of turn. Since this is an instant, I can see where that could be useful. Still, it doesn't really help you push through. Indestructible is more of a defensive quality. And while you will most of the time have Spell Mastery, since this is a 7 mana card, the Indestructibility clause doesn't do enough to really help this card be explosive, be good. If you can cast this on an empty board, if you're a deck that trades aggressively, kills off your opponent's creature, and trades off effectively, sort of resetting with 4 White Knight creatures can be fantastic. If you can't do that, then this card is not going to do enough for 7 mana. So don't just jam this in there thinking this is an absolute bomb. It's very similar to the card in Journey to Nyx that created 4 2/2 Satyrs, and that card wasn't good. So Gideon's Phalanx can be a powerhouse, but a lot of times these 4 knights are going to walk around looking very forlorn on a packed up battlefield. But if you can get them some evasion, or if you have a deck that trades aggressively and allows you to play these knights on an almost empty battlefield, go for it. Hallowed Moonlight is a very interesting card. 1 and a white for until end of turn if a creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast. Exile it instead. This means basically any creatures that are created, any tokens that are created. The previous Gideon's Phalanx, for example, this card would completely neuter that card. One thing that can be said about this card is that at least it cycles, so you can cast this whenever. You can cast this whenever you want just to draw a card, and that's fine sometimes. It's more or less a sideboard card because I think this card was made to sort of combat different constructed decks, mainly Living End and Collected Company type decks, which use spells to put creatures onto the battlefield from the graveyard, or from exile, or from the library. In Limited, there are a few targets for this. For example, Gideon's Phalanx. There's another black creature that summons a demon when you, as an enter the battlefield effect, when you play a creature. And this takes care of that rather nicely. But these cards are not so tough that they need a card specifically for them. So Hallowed Moonlight is never going to be a completely dead card because, as I said, you can always just cycle it. So it's kind of a safe card to sideboard in. But running it main, that seems a little bit too hopeful for my liking. Hix's Prison Warden, however, is a decent creature. 4/4 for 5 mana is okay. We are used to seeing 5 mana giving us a 4/4 fly with Vigilance, meaning Serra Angel. Hix's is no angel. He doesn't fly. What he does do, however, is interesting. He's got Flash, so you can just flash him in to be a big dumb blocker, eat one of the attacking guys. But he has another ability as well. If you let one of your opponent's creatures hit you and then flash in Hix's, Hix's can exile that creature until he leaves the battlefield. This is not really something you want to do very often or very much, but in a pinch, you know, it's a kind of removal. But a lot of times the creature you want to remove the most and the most urgently is the type of creature that you don't want to take a lot of damage from. So being forced to let a creature hit you before you can exile it is unfortunate. Makes perfect sense out of a flavor point of view. He's a prison warden. He cannot imprison someone unless they've done something bad. So a flavor win for Hix's Prison Warden. Flavor wins, by the way, there are several of them in this set. Otherwise, I might actually have to make a separate video just for the fantastic flavor wins in this set. But other than that, it makes the card a little bit worse from a strictly mechanical point of view. Still, a 4/4 for 5 is nothing to snort at, and the different options you have while flashing him in makes him a solid card, but not quite as good as you'd want him to be. But Mythic Meddler is a card true to its name. For 2 and a blue, you get to flash in a 1/4, which already blocks for days. But take a look at its ability. When it enters the battlefield, you may change a target spell or ability to Mythic Meddler. Anyone who's played around with Spells Guide knows that this really can throw a wrench into things. And in a limited situation, this just does a lot of fun things. You can flash this in and steal one of your opponent's pump spells away from their creature. You can save one of your own creatures from dying by flashing this in and letting Mythic Meddler eat a removal spell. You can even steal a beneficial aura from your opponent, because if they try to cast an aura on one of their creatures, that aura targets, and you are allowed to change the target of that aura to Mythic Meddler, letting your opponent enchant your creature instead. That's a sweet play that I'm looking forward to doing, and I'm really looking forward to playing around with Mythic Meddler. The casting cost is low, 2 and a blue. You're going to be able to cast this. You're going to be able to keep out 3 mana, and Mythic Meddler is just such an is-it card that I'm really loving the feel of it. And I think it's going to be very useful too, and you can do some pretty innovative things with it. Thank you for watching. As a watcher of this video, you are being rewarded with a 10% discount of all Magic accessories from Fantasiapeli Turku. Sleeves, dice, binders, deck boxes, all the things you need to play Magic, except the cards. Go in to Fantasiapeli. Maybe you need some new sleeves before the pre-release. That might be a good thing to pick up. And what you need to do is you need to give them the monthly code to get 10% off these accessories. And the code for July, as I said already in the channel update in the last video, is Kithian Yora. The name Gideon Yura had before he traveled away from Theros to Bant. Kithian Yora. That gets you 10% off Magic accessories. So, next weekend, July 11th and 12th, is when the pre-releases start. We've now gone through all the tricks that affect combat. I hope that this helps you get a clearer picture of what kind of things you need to be thinking about. There's a lot of other stuff going on with the different enchantments, there's quirky creatures and sorceries, but all that stuff you'll be able to look at and think about when you're looking at the battlefield. Instants and combat tricks,
you have to just keep in your mind and try to figure out what might they hold in their hand. And that's why I wanted to go through them with you today. And hopefully some of the things I said now will help you remember them and help you do better at your pre-release. So I wish you the very best of luck in your limited games in the Magic Origins limited era. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.